Hello everyone, my name is Naguura, and today I'm going to talk about the 10.1 affix update that they just posted yesterday. It's really good, and I think M+ might be saved. So let's take a look on what they announced. So first of all, I did want to say that they got a lot of negative feedback about the new affixes and the affix changes. I also made a video about the affix changes initially after I had tested them on the PTR. If you haven't watched that video yet, I basically went over like the issues that some of these affixes come with. And there was also lots of feedback from other players on Twitter and on other social medias, in the forums and whatnot. And Blizzard has changed them once already, and now this is the second big update to those affixes. So it definitely looks like Blizzard is actively looking at the feedback that people are providing for these affix changes and for the dungeons in general for Season 2 and Plus. And I just want to say that I think it's really cool that Blizzard is actively really looking at the feedback, and they're not just saying, oh, well, I mean, yeah, some people are maybe unhappy, but we'll see how it turns out, right? They're not saying that anymore, which is something we've seen a lot in the past, where Blizzard was just like, well, I mean, we hear your feedback, but actually we think you should just test it first, right? And we're just gonna put it on live servers, and then maybe we'll fix it in half a year or whatever. But this time they're actually really quick with these updates because, of course, this is not even live yet. The patch is gonna be in a month approximately. And they're definitely listening to feedback a lot and changing them already in the PTR, so that's cool. But yeah, let's go into it. So first of all, they're saying that greetings, as we continue to watch everyone play M+ on the PTR and take in your feedback, we wanted to share additional changes to this week's PTR. Our changes this week aim to further lessen the impact of affixes on Mythic Plus dungeon gameplay, which is something that people have been asking for a lot, right? Which is 100% understandable. People want to play the dungeons, they don't want to be super hindered by the affixes, right? Because obviously the dungeon pool changes completely from one season to the next, so people don't want to sit here and learn the dungeons that are already complex enough, and then on top of that they also have to deal with affixes that completely change how you have to play the dungeon and completely impact you. So, you know, seeing that they hear that feedback is cool. And then they also say, and to match our more challenging affixes to later keystone levels as player progress through the system. Alright, so the first thing they changed here is we have been evaluating our affix tiers and their impact on keystones. While we feel the change to bring affixes online at 7 and 14 is healthy, we wanted to also ensure that the right level of challenge is coming online at keystone level 7 and 14. With that said, we feel our current level 7 affixes have a larger impact on the moment-to-moment gameplay for groups, and have decided to switch the levels that our keystone affixes come online. So this means they're basically saying that they want the less impactful affixes to be on a lower keystone level and the more impactful affixes to be in a higher keystone level, which makes sense, right? Because people that do lower keystone levels, they're just starting out with the dungeons and they don't necessarily want to impact those players more with those affixes early on. So now the level 7 affixes are Afflicted, Incorporal, Volcanic, Entangling, and Storming. They removed Explosive now, which is really good, because I personally think no matter what they would have done with Explosive, I think it always would have just been not fun. Either the explosives die instantly, which makes it a healer job, right? Which is how it works right now. Or they give the explosives a lot of HP and it causes other issues, because if it has a lot of HP, then certain classes just really struggle at target switching and bursting down something single target, right? Especially certain ranged DPS classes, they just don't work that way. They need a lot of ramping time. They can't just switch from one target to the other and then all of a sudden do a lot of damage. That's just not how a lot of ranged DPS classes work. Some melee classes might be able to do that, but that's not the idea of an affix, right? If it's an affix that the damage dealer should be dealing with, then in my opinion, every spec should be able to deal with it and everyone should be able to help out comfortably without it being incredibly annoying. And Explosive is just not that, right? No matter what they would have done with the explosive health, it always would have just felt bad for some DPS classes. So yeah, they removed that completely, which is great. And they brought Volcanic back, which is interesting. I personally think the Volcanic, I mean, no one really cares about Volcanic, right? Because it's there, but then at the same time, it's just not doing anything, right? It's very easy. It's the easiest affix ever, which is fine though, because they specifically, people specifically complained about affixes being too impactful. So bringing back Volcanic, which is a non-affix, is fine in my opinion, right? I personally don't necessarily like Volcanic very much, but you know, I don't care if it's there. All right, so then they have Entangling and Storming as well as these level 7 affixes. Now, I personally think that Incorporal and Afflicted are probably a little bit harder from this affix list. I think Volcanic, Entangling, and Storming are all pretty like easy to deal with most of the time, while Afflicted and Incorporal are a little bit more active. Like you need people to dispel and actively like CC them. And then at level 14 we have Spiteful, Raging, Bursting, Bullstring, and Sanguine now. Now, let's go over what they changed. So Explosive has been removed. Then Incorporeal beings now fade away when combat with non-incorporeal beings has ended. This is something that I already tested in PTR and it works pretty well. So this just means that if an incorporeal being spawns at the end of your pool. Let me explain Incorporal in case you don't know what it does. So Incorporal is the affix where you fight a pack and then randomly there's this being that spawns and the being casts an 8-second cast that needs to be interrupted or CC'd in some form, shape or form. And after 20 seconds, the incorporeal being is gone. If you interrupt it once, it will just start recasting the spell again though. So since it lasts for 20 seconds and the cast is 8 seconds, you will have to at least interrupt it twice if you would interrupt it all the way at the end before they disappear. Now these incorporeal beings, they're susceptible to all forms of CC. Also any kind of specific type of CC. So like Hibernate works on them, Sheep, Incap, like freezing traps, like basically any CC. Shackle Undead works as well. The only thing that does not work is knocks, any kind of displacement. So you cannot grip it, you cannot Typhoon, you cannot knock it in any sense, and you also cannot mind control it. So you cannot control Undead or mind control from a priest, those don't work, but every other thing works. Banish works, Cyclone, stuns, interrupts, like all of that works. So I felt like Incorporal is not that bad of an affix. It's definitely a little bit more of an active affix, but since you can just single target seed one time with like a Hibernate or a Sheep or a Hex, you just press this one CC and you're done with them, right? And the thing that they despawn now at the end of a pack is really good. So that means that if you're fighting 10 mobs and they're at 10% HP and then an incorporeal being spawns, then you can just finish off the pack and the incorporeal being will despawn. So that is great. It doesn't keep you in combat, which is incredibly annoying sometimes, as we know with Spiteful Shades, for example. Alright, then Entangling snare effect has been reduced to 30%, which is great. A 30% slow shouldn't necessarily cause a death, right? Because the problem with Entangled is that it's kind of random when it happens. And I was worried that, like, if I have to dodge an ability from a boss or from the trash, and then all of a sudden I get slowed by 50% out of the blue, then that might cause me to die from this ability that I was trying to dodge, right? With a 50% slow. With a 30% slow, it seems less likely for that to happen, right? So even if you have to dodge a spell or have to dodge something on the floor, a 30% slow that gets applied to you shouldn't necessarily be that big of a problem. And of course, you can also get out of the slow by any kind of means. You can shapeshift out of it, you can use Freedom, you can use Warlock Circle. Anything that gets you out of slows will also remove this spell completely. Then they also added a visual indicator for the maximum range, so you can see how far you have to walk to break Divine, which is great. And then they also added a more distinct sound when it gets applied, which is also great because I personally also had an issue with the visual effect. Sometimes it was hard to see, especially when you were in melee and there's lots of animations, and then it was hard to see. But now that you have a visual effect, it might be that you don't need a weak aura for it, because that is, in my opinion, really important. I don't think players should be reliant on weak auras all the time, so let's hope this new sound is going to be good enough. Then Afflicted has been changed, that the health of the Afflicted souls does no longer scale after Keystone level 20. This is specifically something that I asked for on Twitter, which is, and I'm really happy that they changed this, because I personally thought that any kind of affix that scales beyond level 20 creates this really exponential difficulty of key levels where, so let's say you do a plus 26 fortified key, then of course the mobs have a lot of HP because they scale with key level, and then fortified and tyrannical scales with key level as well. So you already have this exponential difficulty from those affixes and the key level itself. And then if there's certain affixes that also scale with key level, it just makes it even more exponentially difficult for higher key levels, especially because some affixes do not scale with key level, right? So I personally thought it's kind of weird that these affixes scale infinitely. So in my opinion, either every affix scales infinitely or none of them scale infinitely, because otherwise it just creates an imbalance between weak affix weeks, right? Because if one week we have a scaling affix and the next week we have a non-scaling affix, then the non-scaling affix would be a lot easier on higher keys, while the scaling ones are harder, right? And the same issue is with bolstering and sanguine as well, because both bolstering and sanguine also scale infinitely with key level, because bolstering is a percentage HP buff and sanguine is a percentage HP heal. So that means if I get a tick of sanguine healing on a 26 key, that will heal more than if I get a sanguine heal tick on a plus 18 key, right? And that's why these kind of affixes just become so much harder on higher keys. And that's why I kind of asked them to like make them stop scaling above level 20. And they specifically did this for Afflicted now, which is just amazing. Like I love that. So Afflicted shouldn't be that hard anymore to heal if you do like super high keys. All right, then Spiteful Shades, melee damage has been reduced by 10%, which is also great because no one likes to get basically one shot by a Spiteful Shade. And they also have the health and damage to not scale above 20 anymore, which is also amazing. Again, one of these scaling things that I personally didn't necessarily like, because the higher the key level, the longer it took for the Spiteful Shades to die and for you to deal with them, and it just slowed you down more and more and more the higher the key level was, so this is also amazing to hear. Then they reworked Raging. Now Raging grants enemies immunity to crowd control effects for 20 seconds upon reaching 30% health, and there's no longer a damage done increase. So this just means that if you have Raging and you pull a trash pack, once they're on 30% health, they will just be immune to CC. CC means like stuns, knocks, that kind of stuff. They should not be immune to interrupts. Interrupts doesn't count as a C, but we'll have to see once testing happens later today. So if this affix makes them immune to C but not to interrupts, then I think this affix should be pretty easy to handle. There's definitely situations where it can cause problems, right? Because if you do a big pull and there's a bunch of casts going off at the same time and you want to interrupt them by AoE stunning, that will not be possible anymore. So you have to think about this affix in a sense that I don't think it makes it impossible to deal with depending on the pulls, but it definitely makes you think on what you should be doing, which in my opinion is great. I think this affix is going to be great because it doesn't impact you that much. Like sometimes it might do absolutely nothing because certain mobs, it doesn't matter if you can CC them or not, right? And for other pulls, you might have to think about this a little bit more actively, right? If you pull, for example, let's say you do Usher Vault and you pull a bunch of Furies, the Furies cast a frontal that cannot be interrupted, it can only be disrupted. Piercing Shards, I think it's called. So if you do the Fury pull and you have Raging, you have to think about the fact, oh, well, we cannot disrupt them when they're low HP, so what are we gonna do? Do we just have the tank use like a big CD to survive the Piercing Shards and we just don't disrupt them? Or do we soothe one of the Furies so we can disrupt one of them? Because Soothe still works on Raging, of course, right? You can still Soothe and AoE Oppressive Roar them as an evoker, and then you can still CC them. So you just have to think about soothing a little bit more actively, and soothing also becomes less important. For example, if you were doing Court of Stars mini bosses with Raging, you needed a Raging Dispel to survive the mini bosses, right? But now you don't need to soothe the mini boss anymore because the mini bosses are already immune to the sea as they are. So there's nothing that this affix really does to them. So any kind of mob that is already immune to the sea, this Raging effect will do nothing to them, right? So I think this is going to be great. There's definitely, as I said, there's going to be some packs where you have to disrupt certain spells and then you have to soothe that guy. For example, in Ruby Life pools, there's these casters that do the Flame Dance, and the Flame Dance has to be disrupted. So that means if you have a class that can soothe, then they should be soothing the Flame Dancers so you can disrupt that spell when they're below 30% HP. But I think it's going to be a good affix. Then Bolstering no longer increases the health of affected enemies, it only affects their damage. So that means whenever you bolster a mob, they will get the increased damage, but they will not gain more HP, which is again a great change. I think this is an amazing idea because this means that this affix does not slow you down as much anymore. like it used to, especially not on really high keys, because as I said, bolstering is an exponential scale, infinitely scaling affix because of the percentage-based health increase. But now that it doesn't increase the health anymore, it's still scaling infinitely because of the damage of the mobs is going to be percentage-based increase. But in really high keys, most abilities already kill you anyway if you don't deal with them properly, right? They already one-shot you on a like 27 key. So this is not really going to change anything. If there's like a really high bolstered mob that casts something, well, then you just have to interrupt it, right? And it will do a lot of damage to the tank still if they're bolstered, but that will not change anything, right? But at least they're not going to have more HP, so you can deal with them easily, and it's not an affix that you have to waste minutes upon minutes of time just because their HP was increased, right? And this is, in my opinion, a perfect change again, because this means that you still have to watch out for bolstering, right? You still technically don't want to bolster them up super highly because you don't want them to kill the tank. But it's not the end of the world if you bolster them up, as long as you're aware of the extra damage that they're going to be doing, right? So I personally also like this change a lot. All of these changes so far are exactly what the players have been asking for. So the affixes are less impactful now, but you still have to watch out for them. And I think that's exactly what players wanted. Outside, I know there's a lot of people that wanted positive affixes or like his curse affixes, but I think the way they changed these affixes, they're still of course negative affixes, but in not such an impactful way that you wouldn't want to play that week. You know, it's like, oh, bolstering, I'm not going to play, or oh, explosive, I'm just not going to play this week. It's because it's so annoying, right? Now all of these affixes, they shouldn't be so annoying anymore that it affects you so much when you do an M+ dungeon that you get annoyed by them. They should just exist and you should be thinking about them, but you shouldn't necessarily be super impacted by them. And I think all of these changes are doing exactly that, which is great. Then Sanguine Ichor puddles now last 12 seconds instead of 20. Now I think that is the only change that in my opinion did not do exactly what we wanted. Because I think Sanguine is also one of these affixes that can slow you down a lot. And sometimes the way they design mobs, it's just incredibly difficult to deal with Sanguine, right? Like there's certain mobs like archers that stand still and you cannot move them, you can't displace them unless you go line of sight somewhere. But then sometimes there is no line of sight. Thinking about Noku Defensive, right? The very start of Noku Defensive. There's all of these archers everywhere and they just stand there and shoot you. And then they stand in a puddle in Sanguine, and what do? You just sit there and like look at them as they heal up unless you have a knock like a typhoon or something. And that's frustrating, right? And then in addition, Sanguine is also one of these infinitely scaling affixes that I've talked about. If you do a really high key, then one tick of Sanguine heals a lot more health of the mob than it would heal on a lower affix, right? Because it's percentage-based healing. So this is the only change where I would hoped for something like a maximum heal that it could do. Like instead of it being a percentage-based heal, maybe there's just like a maximum amount that Sanguine heals per tick. You know, so it doesn't slow you down that much. You know, they still made it 12 seconds instead of 20, which means that if a mob stands in Sanguine, it's at least not gonna sit there for 20 seconds. It's only gonna sit there for 12 instead. But yeah, I did wish that there was maybe like something that stops them from scaling infinitely, or something that's like just a finite amount of heal that it can do to the mobs in case you do mess up. Because obviously any kind of healing on a mob, you want to stop that from happening. So even if they would cap the healing of Sanguine at a certain amount instead of percentage, people would still want to avoid this from happening, right? It's not that people would just ignore Sanguine and just have them heal all the time if it would be a finite heal amount, right? People would still want to avoid it, but it wouldn't be as punishing if it happens on accident, right? I think this 12-second change is going to help it a little bit, but it's definitely not going to cause frustrating situations to not happen anymore, right? Like you're still gonna have the situations where a mob stands in Sanguine for 12 seconds and heals to full HP because you cannot displace it and you can't move it, right? So I do think that this is the only change where I personally think they maybe could do something else to this that would make it less annoying. Like a finite amount that it heals instead of a health percentage, or the puddle can only heal for like 5 ticks and then it disappears. So a lot of people have suggested that the Sanguine pool drops on the floor, and then if it heals 1 tick, it shrinks, and then it heals again, it shrinks again, it heals again, it shrinks again until it's gone, right? So that would again be like a finite amount of healing that each sanguine petal can do in total, which again would be something that I think would be good. But it's something, right? It's 12 seconds, so I can't really complain about this as much, just because all of these other changes seem exactly what people have been asking for, and I think this is going to be really good. So TLDR, I personally think that all of these changes are great. I think these affixes are going to be really good. I definitely need to test them more in PTR. It's going to be up in a couple of hours. While I'm recording this video, I'm going to be testing them afterwards. So I'm looking forward to testing these affixes. I'm looking forward to Season 2 and Plus. There's still a lot of dungeon changes that I hope they'll do, because the dungeons themselves have a lot of things in them that I'm not necessarily looking forward to. But I hope Blizzard is going to be as active in changing the dungeons as they are with adjusting these affixes. And it's looking good, right? I mean, they're definitely listening, so that's cool. I'm going to work on some dungeon guides for 10.1, and while I'm working on the dungeon guides, I'm also going to be looking at spells and abilities of the mobs in the dungeons that maybe are going to be bad and annoying, and then maybe I'll make a feedback video about the dungeons as well, because clearly Blizzard is listening to feedback, right? And all of the comments that he left on my AFFIXES video, maybe they were going through it, maybe they were going through Twitter feedback, and it looks like we're being heard, right? So I definitely would like to make another feedback video about the dungeons, because maybe, you know, maybe they're listening and maybe we'll get them to change stuff there as well. But yeah, that's cool. Let me know what you think about all of these changes, and let me know if this is something that saved and plus for you for Season 2, or if this is not really going to affect your decision, if you really want those positive affixes, or if you think this is like a good compromise. Let me know what you think. But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, okay? Goodbye!